So for those of you who don't know, I used to work in criminal justice in a former life, and I don't normally talk about this subject too much because it doesn't relate directly so much to the work that I do now here at the Sentence Coaching. But I get asked about it a lot, in fact, by students that I work with. It's something that does seem to fascinate people, and I thought I'd make a video on this because I realised that a lot of people, and this is, from obviously people watching shows and what is put out there, both on social media, legacy media, I think people are more waking up to things now actually, but there is still this line that doesn't really exist where people think you've got the illegitimate world and you've got the legitimate world. You've got the criminal world and the non-criminal world, and that they're somehow detached. The reality is they are not only kind of intersecting in places, at the highest levels, they are completely intertwined. And I want to demonstrate in this video why and how that is the case. And we're also going to talk about the role politicians play in that as well, because I would say it's a system where three groups of people benefit, and at the highest echelons there is really nothing to separate them. But we start at the entry point. We start at the lowest level. So let's take, using some chess pieces here very simplistically to kind of illustrate this. So I've got the pawns here. So the pawns, just like in chess, are the people with the least power. They're the people who are working for other people, and whether it's the illegitimate world, so the world of, say, crime, so let's take, say, a street corner drug dealer, and then let's take someone who is doing a minimum wage legitimate job. These people are not really, they're probably making roughly about the same amount of money, and that might surprise some people, because some people might think, oh, drug dealer equals, yeah, they're doing it because they're greedy and they want lots of money. It might well be that the socio-economic circumstances of their life meant that that was pretty much the only skill set that they had, or the only way they even knew to make money. Not in every case, obviously, and where's, I try and make a distinction between who people are and their actions, and these actions are very, very destructive. That doesn't necessarily mean the person is intrinsically someone who, for example, lacks empathy, shows traits of psychopathy, which the further up we go, the more we're going to see. So at this level, we have very different worlds, but we don't have a difference in the amount of money these people are making, really. In a sense, they're both being exploited by powers far higher up. Where we start to see the difference is the next levels up. So even just going one level up to, for example, let's take a supermarket. So you've got the person stacking the shelves, then you've got maybe their manager. Their manager is not going to be making that much more than they are. They're going to be making a bit more, but it's going to be, a few pounds more. But in the criminal world, it's going to be quite a lot more. So if you take someone with a degree of ambition, then they may well make that transition if there aren't legitimate reasons, if there aren't legitimate avenues rather to go down, and someone actually wants to, say, live a certain type of lifestyle. That's where you'll see someone make the jump, maybe from the legitimate world to the illegitimate world, or why they would choose the illegitimate world in the first place. But we're still talking a really low level. We're still talking, if we're like going all the way to the top of the chain of power, this is still in like the first 2 or 3%, I would say. But the difference is, by the time you get to, say, a mid-level drug dealer, someone who is only a few steps ahead of the street dealer, the person right at the bottom, they could be driving around in a nice car, they could be, living a lavish lifestyle. But there's levels to wealth, and they are still comparatively poor compared to the people that we're going to talk about in a moment. However, their equivalent, say someone in a senior role in a corporation, maybe they're on 100 grand or so per year, but that's taxed, and that's what they actually take home is not going to be what the medium sort of level drug dealer is making. So this gets kind of wider and wider apart. Where things become, I guess, more interesting is where we get to the next level, which is where we have organized crime. And we have this kind of ethical barrier. So if someone starts a business, say a legitimate business, and they have ethical boundaries, they won't get beyond the kind of point of wealth and power, I would say, where they're not going to get to this kind of point where they could even be interacting in the same moral universe as the illegitimate side of things. Because there's certain traits that are needed across the board, and we're going to talk about this in politics as well. I would say one of them, if you read The Corporation by Joel Bakan, or there's been a lot of research into this. There is a huge crossover between psychopathy and many CEOs of large corporations, but a corporation by its very nature, if it's publicly traded, has a duty to make money for its shareholders, and therefore its actual separate legal personality very closely represents that of a psychopath. So I would say that a lack of empathy, a ruthless kind of desire for power, and sort of, not really caring how you get there, combined with obviously competence and actually being good at what, someone has to be a good leader, they have to be, say, a good drug dealer or a good CEO, like they have to be good at what they're doing. There's a degree of competence involved as well. But those traits of absolute ruthlessness and lack of empathy, and a real desire for power at all costs, those basically are that's where the dividing line is, that you'll have a certain company which won't cross certain lines because they have those ethics in place, but you'll have another company, a legitimate company, that will. And the example I want to focus on is the pharmaceutical industry, because it's the easiest one to compare, obviously, with the illegal drug industry. So I'm not going to name the name of the company, but there is a company in the United States that created a drug which was basically heroin in a pill, and aggressively marketed it, got a lot of people hooked on it, and when eventually it was, the laws were changed, it stopped being aggressively marketed and it was reserved only for cases of, very, very severe pain, you were left with a load of people who were like heavily addicted to, or something extremely addictive as heroin, because it's pretty much the same thing. That's the kind of company where the ethics are absolutely no different to that of an organized criminal, or organized crime, or a mafia. Now, meanwhile, a criminal organization at that kind of level will definitely be laundering their money. So for anyone who doesn't know, that means that they will be using some of their illegitimate money to mix it up with legitimate businesses. So they will buy, for example, they might buy up some properties, they might buy some bars, any kind of legitimate business, and they will then mix up the money, mix up the takings, say, from the legitimate businesses with the illegitimate money to basically what's called kind of wash the money, so turn dirty money into clean money. And the higher up you go, the more diversified the money laundering is. So in a sense, you've got these two parallel things going on. Now, who's also got a vested interest in this is politicians. And you've got some people who go into politics because they actually want to make a difference to the world. They actually, they stand for something, they care about something, or that is their principal driver, and they have ethical boundaries. Now, those politicians don't tend to go very far, because what are the traits that you need to become a successful politician, well, guess what? They're the same ones that you need to become a successful business person beyond a certain point. And, certainly if you're running a publicly traded company and someone who's successful in the criminal world. So you suddenly have this equation where you have got the same character types in politics, in very sort of high up levels of certain types of corporation, and in, of course, organized crime. And so it doesn't then take a huge leap to say, well, these people are going to want to, if they can help each other and they can actually, through their own self-interest, if they can make money off serving each other, then there's going to be no ethical kind of qualms about doing that. So if we take the example of the opioid crisis that I was just referring to, the war on drugs as a political kind of, just as a vote, as an election winner, as something which is, it gets people very emotionally charged. And that's because drugs do destroy lives. It's because people can relate to it. Someone knows someone who has, for example, like had a child that they've lost to a heroin overdose, for example. And a lot of people aren't educated on the way that this is really working. So it's something which politicians will always know will win votes and win elections if they can spin it in the right way. So they have a vested interest. Our legitimate corporation in that example, who created what I call the heroin in a pill, obviously they've got a huge vested interest in making money. And then when the laws change, the politicians obviously change those laws, well then who benefits? The illegitimate businesses. And so in a sense, it becomes this loop where they're all helping each other. And the higher up you go, the deeper these connections run. So you get to this point where you have the most ruthless characters in society. And by the way, these characters, the further up you go, so you might be thinking now about CEOs that you can, I'm not gonna name people, but you know who I'm talking about, the people you see on the Forbes rich list. You think of politicians you see as presidents or prime ministers. These are actually not the people who are truly running the show, because the people truly running the show need to be in the shadows to be able to do what they're doing. Because obviously if people were to realize this was going on, then it would destroy the narrative. And storytelling, the way that you frame a story, is a huge deal. And part of keeping these two worlds separate, part of, this is a crime, this is not a crime, part of the framing of law and society like that is how order is maintained and power is sustained. So these people need to operate in the shadows. So the people truly pulling political strings, you've never heard their names, I've never heard their names. It's the same in corporations, it's the same obviously in the illegitimate world. That's the only place where you wouldn't expect to have heard the names until they maybe end up in the news. They get arrests are made, but again, the arrests that are made, very often it's people who are lined up to be kind of framed so it can look like something's really being done. I said at the beginning of the video that someone had asked me a question which had really made me want to make this video, and that question was, why haven't governments realised that if they just legalised drugs, they could make a load of money by taxing them? And this was an intelligent person asking. It was an intelligent person asking this question, and they were looking at it that, well, under neoliberalism, the legitimate corporation would. You take, say, the company I mentioned earlier, they would then be advertising it on billboards. Why would they not do that? And then the government can take their cut in tax. And the answer to that is because they already are making far more money in the realm that is invisible. So that is the only reason why that is not the case, because taxes, all of these kind of things, they don't have to exist. the people who are the levels of money involved going on, which you're not hearing about, are exponentially higher than anything that you are hearing about. And that is the only reason why, for example, drugs are not legalized and controlled by the free market, because the people who are running those types of areas of the free market are already profiting off the illegitimate world. The politicians are in on it. I'm not saying all, but the ones that are the most powerful, because fundamentally these character traits, which you can pretty much narrow down to psychopathy and competence, are the further up you go, and I would say at the very, in the kind of realm which is beyond even, like I'm someone who has a degree of expertise in this, but it's stuff that I wouldn't even claim that I can speculate beyond a certain point. It's the further you go, the more I would say that it's pretty much guaranteed that you're dealing with psychopathic individuals, because the lines you would have had to cross to get there would necessitate that you have no empathy or remorse, and that lust for power is the only thing that is driving you. So, to wind this back to the beginning, the next time you think about criminals and non-criminals, the criminal world and the legitimate world, remember that these people here, they're really just trying to put bread on the table and trying to survive. And at the very top levels, it's a completely different picture. And the darkness, the psychopathic nature of the world that we're in, and you only have to look out of the window and see the things going on to realize that we're living in a world controlled by psychopaths. That's psychopaths who are politicians, that is psychopaths that are CEOs, and that is psychopaths who are criminals as defined by the law. I'll leave it there.